Now let's go into the actual story. So this will be our day 2 of our 8 days of Hanukkah. So the plan is we're going to be like separating this episode into different parts. And so the part we just did will be day 1. This will be day 2. So let's actually talk about the story now. Hanukkah, the actual story of when the Maccabees did their thing.
Yes.
Pull it up. I'm reading from a website that I used to use when I was way younger, and I just introduced Krista to today.
And I want to know why he didn't introduce me to this when we were doing Sukkot or Rosh Hashanah or...
I probably looked at it too during those periods. It just never crossed my mind.
Did me dirty, but that's good.
I think I've had it saved in my bookmarks for forever. And so it's not like it was hidden from me. But yeah,
but it was hidden from me.
Yeah, it's called Hebrew4Christians.com. Hebrew4Christians.com. And so they have like a lot of cool stuff in here. So if you ever have time, we'll put the link in the description. You can check it out. The story of Hanukkah. So according to mainstream Jewish tradition, the story of Hanukkah goes something like this. In 333 BC, Alexander the Great conquered Syria, Egypt, and Babylonia, and promoted a lenient form of Hellenistic culture, encouraging the study of the language, customs, dress of the Greeks. Alexander was not necessarily bad to the Jews, and the legend tells that when he marched through Jerusalem, he asked the high priest to erect a statue of his honor within the temple. The high priest told Alexander that such was forbidden, though the Jewish people would construct a living memorial by naming all their firstborn sons after the great king. Alexander agreed to this, and things went fairly well for the Jews. Nevertheless, the encounter of the Jewish people and their Torah-based ethics with the worldview of ancient Greece proved to be a traumatic shock, which ultimately threatened to undermine the very existence of Judaism. Over a century later, so Alexander the Great did his thing, so this is a little bit later. Over a century later, in 167 BC, the ripened fruit of Hellenization began to appear in the form of one of Alexander's successors, the Syrian king Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who began to openly persecute the Jews. Among other atrocities, Antiochus appointed a Hellenistic high priest to the temple, prohibited the study of the Torah, and desecrated the altar by requiring pigs to be sacrificed on it. And the Jews refer to Antiochus not as Epiphanes, but God, Zeus, made manifest, but rather Epimenides, the madman. So Antiochus' name Epiphanes means God made manifest, which points to Zeus made manifest. But the Jews at that time called him Epimenes, which means the madman. So he was called by the Jews Antiochus the madman.
I approve of their message.
Yeah. These outrages finally incited rebellion, and by 165 BC, so about 2 years later, the Hasmonean family of Mattatyahu, the high priest, and his youngest son, Judah Maccabee, the Hammer, organized a revolt that eventually succeeded in evicting the Syrian Greeks from Israel. The temple in Jerusalem was liberated but needed to be rededicated for the Jewish worship. According to later tradition, as recorded in the Talmud, at the same time of the rededication on Kislev 25, there was very little oil left, and that had not been defiled by the Syrian Greeks. Oil was needed for the menorah to burn continually in the temple, but there was only enough to last for 1 day. Miraculously, the sanctified oil burned for 8 days, the time needed to prepare a fresh supply of oil for the menorah. An 8-day festival was declared to commemorate this miracle.
And that, my friends, is the story of Hanukkah.
Yeah, where God moved.
Dedication. Yeah, and it's dedication. And then I think the other really significant thing about that story is, I think a lot of times in tradition, there's the expectation that holiness or right sacrifice is achieved on our own. But this is a great story because they couldn't be pure on their own. They didn't have enough, but the Lord took what they had, and he's like, I got you. Like, I am your righteousness. Like, I'm the one that takes your 1 day supply and makes it 8 because, like you took the first step. You rededicated the temple. And now, like, yeah, I don't know if it kind of stood out to me.
Yeah.
He supplies our righteousness.
And he responds to the like true zeal.
Mm-hmm.
Zeal for the house of God.
Amen.
Because it wasn't like they were fighting for themselves. Obviously, there's certain times in history that people will fight for themselves or for their own freedom, but they were fighting because they defiled the temple. Because this wasn't just like a normal dude. He was the son of the high priest, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it reminds me of when the other priest kid came with a spear and like ran through some people.
Phineas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You don't mess with the temple of God around a child of a priest, apparently. A kid of the high priest.
No, you sure don't. The Lord, he is holy.
Yeah.
So that is the story. There's way more information below where Kenneth read the story. So we encourage you to check that out. It talks about how to celebrate and everything, including specific things that are supposed to be read on each day.
Yeah. Because normally when they go through Hanukkah, the traditional Jews, they'll read the story of the Moses dedicating the temple, I believe.
It's Numbers. Yep.
Yep, number 7.
Yep.
Okay. So let's jump into a little bit more of the history of it, because it's something that you brought up kind of when we were like jumping into this, is the Daniel aspect of it. Because I think you were reading a book where it talks about how Daniel prophesied this happening. So a cool thing that I think you know this, and a lot of people may or may not know, is a lot of times prophecy in the Old Testament and in the New Testament are always like have multiple manifestations, where there's a moment in history that it happens, and then there's a greater moment where it's going to be truly fulfilled. And so we see in the book of Daniel where he speaks of then like the entire history of from Alexander the Great to the splitting of the kingdoms to everything that Antiochus will do, Epiphanes, where he'll fight with Egypt and he'll come back up and he'll do all these various things. It like speaks of all of it through in the book of I think Daniel chapter 11, and it kind of like lays it all out. And then at a certain point, it separates from what's going to happen in the future, but it's like a prophetic word that you'll see now, but it's also prophesying that something to come in the future.
Yeah. Yep.
And so we're going to kind of talk a little bit around that also.
Okay. So I'm just going to say I got this book from a mentor. It's God's Appointed Times, a practical guide for understanding and celebrating the biblical holidays by Barney Kasdan. So we want to give credit where credit is due. Shoot, I just accidentally shut the book, guys. Don't be me. All right, I found it. So it says Hanukkah is clearly predicted in later prophetic writings. The visions given to the prophet Daniel is an amazing detailed description of the events surrounding Hanukkah, as he describes the coming kingdoms that would have impact on Israel. Daniel writes, The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes is the first king. The 4 horns that replace the one that was broken off represent 4 kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. That's Daniel 8:21 through 22. This is a graphic description of the rise of the Hellenistic Empire. With its strong central leader, the large horn, Alexander the Great was indeed broken by his early death. His 4 generals, the 4 horns, split the kingdom between themselves, yet there were even more specific details given by Daniel. In the latter part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a stern-faced king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastations and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Peace. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. Daniel 8:23 through 25. According to the word given Daniel, the focal point of this Hellenistic kingdom would be a leader who, by the power not his own, would persecute the Jewish people. He would magnify himself through his brutal attacks and words, as was the case with Antiochus, who called himself Epiphanes, which we talked about a little while ago. Yet God promised that this evil ruler would be broken without human agency. The fanatical persecution by the Seleucids is predicted along with the miraculous deliverance by God. The miracle of Hanukkah is mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures with such detail that some liberal scholars have suggested that Daniel was written after the fact, not prophetically. What an important time of history to understand. What a great celebration Hanukkah should be.
So because it was too accurate, they were like, yeah, this couldn't happen.
Yeah, they were like, this had to have been written after the fact. This can't be prophecy. Like, God doesn't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
How is prophecy supposed to be? If it's not anything else but detailed and accurate, then how do we know it's real? I mean, how is that different than like me reading my horoscope, which could apply to anybody?
True.
Like, for real, y'all.
They just say a bunch of nonsense and be like, this is for you today, which is, it's like a fortune cookie where it's like super generic.